Can I ask you a question? I don't mean to be rude in any way. I really respect you. But I want to know, is it a good idea to be friends with Israel when they bombed the U.S. Liberty? We all know that this was an inside job.
Yeah.
You know it is. They killed those men. Well, this is an important story that maybe if you don't know your history, it repeats itself, huh? Nobody cares about the U.S. Liberty when 34 American sailors died and 171 got injured. But it was a cover-up, huh? You want to see some of the pictures of the dead soldiers? I got the photographs right here, Wolf. Dead American soldiers. Sailors, actually. U.S. Liberty, nobody cares about them. Israel got to bomb them, drop napalm on an American ship, but nobody cares. Anybody know about the U.S. Liberty?
I do, I care.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you.
I do, I know that. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
That's good. Keep up the work.
Thank you.
Doing good.
He doesn't care.
He does. He's probably just as shy.
You guys know about the U.S. Liberty?
Alrighty.
You know about it? When Israel bombed an American ship, got away with murder?
How long ago was that, brother?
1960, so I won't record.
Well, I'm really excited about a lot of his ideas, especially when it comes to bringing the soldiers home. I've been serving for 10 years now, and all 10 years of those have been during wartime. I'd like to see a little peacetime army, and I think he has the right idea.
Now, you have done 2 tours in Afghanistan. You told me you're going to go back for a 3rd tour. I mean, if you can see your neck right there, what you have on your tattoo, 9/11, remember, and a picture of the Twin Towers. You know, some Republicans out there have been saying that Ron Paul would be very dangerous for this country because he wants to bring troops like you back from your post from all over the world.
Well, I think it would be even more dangerous to start nitpicking wars with other countries. Someone like Iran, Israel is more than capable of.
All right, we just lost our connection, unfortunately, with Dana. Dana, stand by if you can hear me. We're going to get back. You want to go to Candy Crowley over at Mitt Romney headquarters. People are beginning to fill up that room over there. Want to go to Candy Crowley over at Mitt Romney headquarters. People are want to go to Candy Crowley over at Mitt Romney headquarters. People are want to go to Candy Crowley over at Mitt Romney headquarters. People are
We were an American ship. If you knew we were an American ship, you knew what frequencies we were going to be on because you knew what the fleet frequencies were. Duh. Hello.
The attackers knew their target, but they were keeping their own identity well hidden.
During the attack, no one saw any markings, and some of the men told me later that they made a special effort to identify them, and they swear that there were no markings, that these airplanes were unmarked.
They took out all of our transmitting antennas and shortly thereafter deposited napalm on the deck. It appeared to me that it was the intent of the attacker to take out all communications and keep all people off deck so they couldn't reestablish any sort of antennas or communication system. If it was an accident, it was the best planned accident I've ever heard of. The only reason we got the SOS out was because my crazy troops were climbing the antenna string and long wires while they were being shot at.
The Liberty was now paralyzed, her power and steering control lost. But her desperate SOS message had been picked up by the American 6th Fleet, 500 miles away off Crete. Retaliation was ordered for the attack. On the USS America, 2 bombers were readied while their fighter escort was launched.
Those aircraft were brought forward, and I believe they were launched before we went into Condition November.
Condition November meant that nuclear-armed A-4 bombers were to be used. Incredibly, the U.S. was about to launch a nuclear strike against Egypt, the Liberty's presumed attacker.
One of them was taxied forward to Cat 1, and it was it had like a shroud around the underside of the fuselage. And it had Marine guards escorting the A4. So that was a very unusual experience. I've never seen anything like that.
There was a flash message, as I recall, from one of the carriers that said they had launched ready aircraft. The launching of ready aircraft, you understand, that is typically nuclear-armed aircraft.
Cairo was about to be incinerated. The U.S. Embassy was told that an attack was coming. Richard Parker was the political consul.
There was this message that the Navy was preparing to retaliate against Egypt for the attack on the Liberty. They thought that it was the Egyptians who attacked it. They were preparing to attack Egypt in response.
A few minutes later, Tony Hart passed a Pentagon message through to the Navy. Recalled the aircraft.
My first thought was, as well, we don't want to do mushroom clouds. The recall probably is to rearm the aircraft.
About 10 minutes later, the USS America and Washington were connected by voice link. The Defense Secretary himself came on the line.
McNamara directed Comm 6 Fleet to recall the aircraft, and Comm 6 Fleet said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Absolutely certain. Recall the aircraft."
The attack on the Liberty had triggered an extraordinary response. Nuclear-armed planes had been on their way to Cairo. A nuclear strike had been minutes away and had only just been averted. But it seems McNamara was also unwilling to send aircraft directly to help the Liberty. The fleet commander asked for permission to send a rescue flight of conventionally armed aircraft.
The Admiral was talking to McNamara and asking for permission to relaunch the ready aircraft, relaunch any aircraft. And McNamara said no, that no aircraft were to be launched. McNamara is the boss, you know. He doesn't have to explain why he says what he says.
Dave Lewis heard from another officer about McNamara's dealings with the 6th Fleet.
I'm Admiral Larry Geis, the commander of Task Force 60.
He was very upset. He told me he knew it was going to be hushed up, and I wasn't to say anything about it, but he had to get it off his chest. That he had sent aircraft and notified Washington, obviously via the Criticom network, because it got to Bob McNamara and Lyndon Johnson, and he had the aircraft recalled by Robert McNamara. So he said he reconfigured a flight of aircraft with aircraft incapable of carrying nuclear weaponry and relaunched it. He again notified Washington. Again, Robert McNamara ordered the aircraft recalled. He challenged the order, and Lyndon Johnson came on. Said he didn't give a damn if the ship sunk. He would not embarrass his allies.
Robert McNamara has never fully discussed his role in the Liberty controversy.
You recalled planes sent to rescue the Liberty.
I'm absolutely certain that's false.
You didn't send a signal to the 6th Fleet?
Absolutely not. I don't know what the hell happened, and I haven't taken time to find out. But there are all of these claims that we sent planes, the planes were going out and then we turned them around, and that we intentionally allowed the Israelis to sink the Liberty.
Word came down, prepare to abandon ship. That meant prepare only, go up and get ready, get near the life rafts. Well, I went up first, popped the hatch, looked out for the life rafts. They were either gone or burning. And at the same moment, I looked to the stern of the ship, and I saw one of the torpedo boats methodically machine gunning one of our life rafts that had floated back. We cut the life rafts loose because they were burning or had been damaged. And they floated back behind us, and he was machine gunning the life raft. And I knew that had there been anyone in there, they certainly wouldn't be alive. It happened so fast, it didn't seem real. None of the attacks seemed real to me. I was bewildered. I couldn't understand why they would do it to us. I just didn't understand a thing at that point.
These guys didn't die for anything. They just died. They were slaughtered for nothing.
The American embassy immediately reported back to the State Department in Washington.
I was really the first one that got the word. And my immediate reaction was it could not have been an accident.
Shortly before 10 in the morning, Washington time, the news was passed on to President Johnson.
He was rather inclined to agree with my view was that it had to have been an intended attack.
Johnson's belief that the attack was deliberate is preserved in the minutes of a White House meeting the following day. Also present was the CIA Director, Richard Helms.
And I know that for the first 24 hours, the President was furious that something like this had gone on.
Whatever Johnson's inner circle thought privately, officially they accepted Israel's apologies and its explanation.
Everybody seemed to be a little appalled at the Israelis, but this was not reflected in the public positions that the collective group had outside that room. And I think we were overprotective of the Israelis at that point.
I think the feeling was that the pressure, political pressure, would be too much, and they were just going to let it go. That and thought maybe it would just go away. As a matter of fact, he said to me, standing in the cabinet room one day, "Have you looked at the New York Times? The attack on that American ship is on page 29, when it should have been on the front page." And then I guess various people got at him and so forth, and he changed his mind. But or I don't think he changed his mind, he just changed his actions.
Air Force intelligence analyst was following radio intercepts of the attack.
The communications I had in my hands originated from an Israeli flight commander. Evidently, from his questioning to the ground control, one can deduce that he had been given specific orders to attack that ship before he left the ground. And when he saw it was an American ship, he questioned those orders. And he questioned those orders to his ground control. That same conversation that I had in my hands specifically noted that the ground control said, proceed with the attack, and there was still doubt in the Israeli pilot's mind. And he said, no, this is American, repeat those orders again, and he was told flat out, do attack this ship.
By this time, all the injured men had been taken aboard the rescue ships.
I remember being hauled up into that helicopter in a basket that had been wrapped tightly around me from head to toe. The corpsman, not knowing which end was up, sat on my head all the way back. And all I could think of was what an ignominious way to die after having survived a torpedo attack.
They took the wounded and the dead off and took them to the USS America, where we were then taken into their hospital area. That was when the Navy and the might of the United States Navy was really with us. Up until then, it hadn't been.
An unarmed American ship had been attacked by Israeli planes and boats. 34 sailors were dead, and the U.S. had done nothing to help. For the first time in 35 years, we can explain why. The theories cast light on the tangled web of American-Israeli relations. Some people suspect the ship might have been overhearing information on Israeli operations in the Sinai.
I think they intended to attack the ship. Exactly why they wanted to, I'm not sure. They may have felt we were, with the Liberty, we were listening into some conversations and other things that were going on that they didn't want us to know about. And they had been engaged in some pretty outlandish stuff.
in the course of the war, and I didn't think they wanted us to know all the detail of that.
I don't think that we would have cared.
There's a broader theory that the attack was intended to be blamed on Egypt and would therefore draw America into the war, and was carried out with the foreknowledge of certain people in Washington. The Liberty's captain had always suspected this was the case. In 1997, at Arlington Cemetery, he broke his 30-year silence.
For many years, I had wanted to believe that the attack on the Liberty was pure error. It appears to me that it was not a pure case of mistaken identity. I think that it's about time that the State of Israel and the United States government provide the crew members of the Liberty and the rest of the American people the facts of what happened and why it came about that the Liberty was attacked 30 years ago today.
Less than 2 years later, McGonigal himself would be buried at Arlington. Shortly before he died, he sent an open letter to President Clinton calling for Israel to acknowledge publicly that her armed forces had deliberately attacked the USS Liberty.
Captain McGonigal was more than just a captain in the Navy. He was a friend. He was a sailor's captain.
Towards the end of his life, McGonigal confided in his old friend, the chief engineer.
Captain and I was real close, and every time I'd see him while he was in the hospital, he would cry, and he called me a few years, 2 or 3 years before he died. He was going to be in Washington for me to come up there, and I sat in a room with him. We chatted a while, and then he got started telling me that those SOBs really did us in, George. And I said, what are you talking about?
McGonigal went on to say that if the Liberty had been sunk with all hands, the blame would naturally fall on Egypt and her Soviet backer.
We were guinea pigs to be sunk, and then we could say Egypt and Russia did it. That way the United States could have stepped right in and helped Israel.
We've found evidence that this was part of a larger plan hatched by Israeli and American intelligence to invade Egypt and overthrow Nasser, a plan codenamed Cyanide. A key figure was James Angleton, Israel's closest friend in the CIA, and unique beneficiary of a memorial from Mossad. Jim Ennis first came across cyanide almost by chance.
I had gone to the LBJ library asking for, all Liberty documents, and this one-page paper came out of nowhere. Minutes from the 303 committee.
The 303 committee was a secret group that used to meet at the old executive office building, round the corner from the White House.
303 committee was simply a device for examining covert operations of any kind and making a judgment on behalf of the president so he wouldn't be nailed with the thing if it failed.
Here in April 1967, the committee met to discuss a sensitive Defense Department project. It would involve the Liberty with a highly risky submarine operation to help Israel. Scribbled on the minutes is a note: submarine within UAR waters, another term for Egypt.
Especially the fact that this was in the Liberty file suggested that this had to do with the submarine that was near us and with cyanide and all the other things.
Dave Lewis had also heard about cyanide. One of his officers had told him the ship was carrying secret documents in connection with a submarine project.
He said, there are sealed orders in my safe for Project Cyanide that involves communication via submarine in case of war. That That's all I know about it. The orders were never open. When the attack took place, there wasn't time. So I don't know what they said.
What connection could this mysterious submarine have had with the Liberty? And why was it being discussed a full 2 months in advance of the war? The operation is still so sensitive that we could get no comment from US or Israeli intelligence.
Operation Sinai. If I heard about it, I heard so.
What was it?
I suggest we stop the interview here. What do you say? Why you want it?
Why would you not be able to speak about Operation Cyanide? It's 34 years since.
Signature and loyalty to my country.
Is it very sensitive?
I am built so, and I know exactly what I am able to tell you, and I know exactly where I stop. And here I stop.
Operation Cyanide was a joint Israeli-American venture using submarines and other covert-type intelligence gathering efforts against the UAR. But that has a logical explanation. The explanation is the UAR was totally Soviet equipped. They had Soviet advisors. The Soviet Union was our arch enemy at the time. And we were concerned in a volatile Mideast situation with the Soviet problem. We were concerned wherever the Soviets showed up. And they had considerable influence in the United Arab Republic. So there were these joint ventures with Israeli intelligence.
We were strategic and tactical reconnaissance photo processing specialists. We flew probably 8 missions that day. All bomb damage assessment. All airports in disarray. Lines of aircraft destroyed in place. From what we saw in that film, it was unchallengeable destruction of the enemy.
This covert operation was also part of Cyanide. Before the war, the team had secretly been sent to an Israeli air base in the Negev desert. The men wore unmarked uniforms and had no ID, while 4 American reconnaissance planes were disguised as Israeli.
There was a hurry-up paint job done to the aircraft to identify them as Israeli aircraft, so that they would be in conformance with normal Israeli markings.
No, not one single word of it is true. I don't know what is the man. I don't know. Fantasy. It's a fantasy. He's dreaming. He's making it up. Nothing.
They can deny it now. Fine. Take a look at the reconnaissance information that the Israelis have that was published publicly in Time magazine, Life magazine, I think Look magazine. That was our work. The Israelis had no reconnaissance aircraft, and you can't get the detail off of gun cameras that was in those films.
If it's true that America was secretly in the war against Egypt, this had to be kept quiet at all costs.
Well, the implication would be very serious. I mean, first of all, it means that LBJ and his people around him had been lying to us through their teeth. And that may be a minor matter for most people, but it'd be important to us. But more important, it would mean an American participation in the attack on Egypt. A very serious thing for us to have done. And it would have, finished our relations with the Arab world for a long time to come. As it was, 6 Arab states broke relations with us.
Whatever lies behind the attack, the human tragedy was that 34 young men were dead. Most were killed below decks, and their remains could only be removed when the Liberty finally arrived at Malta. By then, the bodies of 5 others had drifted out of the hole. Only when the dock was drained did the full horror of the destruction become apparent.
I remember taking that photograph, and I remember seeing parts of bodies in the cables and wiring that were jammed around, especially in the top part. It seemed like on the overhead, a lot of parts of bodies were hanging there. It looked like a meat locker. We had to go down and start cleaning that up.
One of the men killed was Alan Blue, the NSA linguist so suddenly sent abroad. His wife didn't even know he was on the USS Liberty.
I was sitting in a park in Washington, D.C., having my lunch about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on June 8. It was a beautiful, clear, sunny day. And about 15, 20 feet away from me, someone had a radio.
Administration handling of the June Arab-Israeli war crisis.
And I overheard this report on their radio that an American ship had been attacked in the Mediterranean. And my heart sank. Even though I did not know he was on that ship, I was still very frightened. I picked up my lunch. I went inside to my office. I called NSA, and they said, yes, we've been looking for you.
Alan Blue was later buried at Arlington National Cemetery. For the previous month, his widow had had to share her house with minders from the NSA. They told her nothing and controlled her contact with the outside world.
I think they were anxious to not have any press around us at that time. No one from the NSA ever contacted me to explain what happened. There were many, many people at the service. I'm not sure who they all were.
In Malta, meanwhile, the Liberty men were alarmed by the way Admiral Kidd was steering the naval inquiry. He seemed to have made up his mind in advance and was ignoring crucial evidence.
I testified about 3 major items that I had witnessed. One was the captain's condition. I also testified about the armor-piercing projectiles that had been sent through our ship. And I also testified about the machine gunning of the life rafts by the Israeli torpedo boats. I testified, like I said, for about 2.5, 3 hours. I didn't know until, I don't remember, months later, that much of my testimony was never recorded.
McGonigal had blacked out during the attack, so the chief engineer took command of the ship. Yet the inquiry wasn't interested in what he had to say.
I got so peeved off I couldn't see straight. Before it broke up, I stood outside the door and wanted to go in there so that I could get my say in those minutes that were being taken. But he wanted to keep me out of that almost completely.
The report was reviewed at the Navy's European headquarters by Merlin Starring, later the Navy's top lawyer. It didn't appear to support Kidd's conclusion that Israel had attacked in error.
Well, I simply could not find an evidentiary basis for that conclusion. I had considerable trouble with the record in attempting to, as I read through it, attempting to find the evidence, the testimony, or other evidence that would support some of the findings or opinions or conclusions that the Court of Inquiry had drafted and had reached.
Today, even after 35 years, the Liberty incident remains so sensitive that the U.S. Navy refuses to comment on it.
I think there was a cover-up. I think there were details known from talking with some of those crew. It was pretty bad.
How can my personal view be other than my American view, which was that they intended to attack this ship, and there's no excuse that can be found for their saying that this was just a mistake?
Most importantly, President Johnson, like Richard Helms, would also have been getting the radio intercepts.
It's like a cable or a telex, right, that was sent to all the intelligence agencies and to the White House at the same time, because it was an American ship being attacked by a friendly power. Anything that's inimical and dangerous to the United States that the president has to see on a near real-time basis, he has to receive it.
Did Johnson order a cover-up?
No, that I'm aware of.
But people were sworn to secrecy. The naval inquiry is regarded by many as incomplete.
You ask McNamara about those questions. I'm not going to answer those.
I am not saying anything about the Liberty, period.
In Israel, it was soon business as usual. An inquiry attended by the Navy chief, Shlomo Arel, concluded that the attack was mainly due to a series of Israeli blunders. Despite this, nobody was charged or court-martialed.
They didn't find anyone guilty of committing any crime or negligence or whatever. But this is, I don't want to make apologies for that, because it was outside my jurisdiction.
After a month in Malta, the Liberty was patched up and ready to begin her journey home.
It was pretty eerie because we had to stand watches different times down where the torpedo had hit. We had to check for leaks, and you could smell the fuel oil, and it was so eerie. You know, your shipmates were just down there, and you'd swear that they were talking to you.
We arrived to fanfare, to local press, and Miss Norfolk, Miss Hospitality, Miss everybody. Anyway, they got us in and got us tied up, and all inside was nothing but just shell of a ship. Nothing was left. One of the things that bothered me for years was coming home. I'd survived all that other stuff, but the coming home part and facing people who'd lost their loved ones, that was very difficult. Very, very difficult.
The men had been ordered never to talk about the attack under threat of court-martial. Now the Navy scattered them, and no two were posted together. Even their medals were awarded secretively.
I remember receiving my Purple Heart in the captain's office in Bremerhaven, Germany, and with the warning, don't ever tell anyone where you got it. Don't ever. I knew at that time that things had gone terribly wrong with what had happened to us. I knew something was up, and so I basically made a decision to get out of the Navy, and I finished off my obligation, resigned my commission, and left the Navy.
Captain McGonigal was given America's highest award, but with little ceremony.
That's the only Congressional Medal of Honor that I'm familiar with that was not presented by the President of the United States. It's normal protocol for the President to present the CMH. It was presented by the Secretary of the Navy at the Navy Yard, a little base down in southeast Washington, rather than at the White House by the President.
Well, certainly, I think it was the way that the Navy and the White House handled this was a travesty. Johnson didn't want this thing publicized. He thought it would harm relations with Israel and his relations with Jews in the United States.
For Liberty, as you were commanding officer at that time.
Thank you very much, sir. For the officers and men of Liberty, I accept this Presidential Unit citation, and I would add my own personal appreciation for their professional devotion to duty.
Every one of our citations talks about military action, occasionally mentions enemy action, but never mentions that it was the State of Israel.
For heroic achievement in connection with the unprovoked and unexpected armed attack on USS Liberty in the Eastern Mediterranean on 8th of June 1967. A Silver Star Medal to Lieutenant George H. Golden. 3 times when told to stand by for torpedo attack.
I witnessed a cover-up take place of the highest magnitude. I witnessed someone receiving the highest medal of the land, someone being promoted, someone given his choice of duty in the Navy for his silence. Nothing more, nothing less. And the silence paid off. The captain never stepped forward until the end of his life. And I only think what could have been if he'd have stepped forward in 1967.
But a presidential election was coming up. Nobody in power wanted to let questions about the USS Liberty spoil relations with victorious Israel.
I think it should have caused more of a problem than it did. We went on in official reactions to each other, and we renewed our old friendships. Considered we really ignored it for all practical purposes, and we shouldn't have. It was a very bad thing.
If you want to win a war quickly, there will be more mistakes, unfortunately. But the result of those mistakes is that you have won the war in 6 days. So this is the price you have to pay. Unfortunately, the price in this case, one of the prices, was the Liberty ship.
Israel today still occupies the conquered Palestinian territories, thanks to continued U.S. support. The war of only 6 days has left a painful legacy of suspicion, suffering, and sorrow. Among those living with that legacy are the Liberty survivors, bitter about their own government's cover-up. Jim Ennis spent years trying to find out what had really happened.
This book will be with me as long as I'm here. I've often said I'd like to have seen it go away years ago. I would have hoped that my book would have generated a congressional investigation that would have answered the remaining questions, and the whole thing could have been put to rest, and there'd be no question about what happened and why, and we just put it on and we all go on to other things.
Jerry Goss, Petty Officer. Melvin Smith, Chief Petty Officer. Carl Noah, Seaman. John Spicer, Petty Officer. Gary Blanchard, Seaman. Alan Blue, Civilian. Jerry Converse, Petty Officer.
There's 34 guys that can't talk. And there's 34 families that need some answers. And there's the rest of the crew that needs some answers too. I really don't have any malice against the guys who pulled the triggers, because they were the guys that were given orders, do it, because if you don't do it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. I would like to meet those guys and see what they've had to say to me. People who gave the orders, they got away with murder.
The BBC 4 Zone returns to BBC 2 next Tuesday with a profile of the influential advertising agency that included Charles Saatchi, Alan Parker and David Putnam, the men from the agency 11:20 next week. And starting now over on BBC 4, a contender for the coveted Samuel Johnson Prize for Fiction.
August 2nd, the destroyer Maddox reported it was attacked by a North Vietnamese patrol boat. It was an act of aggression against us. We were in international waters. I sent officials from the Defense Department out, and we recovered pieces of North Vietnamese shells that were clearly identified as North Vietnamese shells from the deck of the Maddox. So there was no question in my mind that it had occurred. But in any event, we didn't respond. Two days later, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, two destroyers, reported they were attacked.
Where are these torpedoes coming from? Well, we don't know. Presumably from these unidentified craft.
There were sonar soundings, torpedoes had been detected, other indications of attack from patrol boats. We spent about 10 hours that day trying to find out what in the hell had happened. At one point, the commander of the ship said, "We're not certain of the attack." Another point, they said, "Yes, we're absolutely positive." And then finally, late in the day, Admiral Sharp said, "Yes, we're certain it happened." So I reported this to Johnson, and as a result, there were bombing attacks on targets in North Vietnam. Johnson said, "We may have to escalate. I'm not going to do it without congressional authority." And he put forward a resolution, the language of which gave complete authority to the president to take the nation to war. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution. Now, let me go back to the August 4th attack.
Well, there apparently been at least 9 torpedoes in the water. All missed.
Yeah.
No, I don't. Wait a minute now. I'm not so sure about this number of engaged.
Right.
We'd have to check it out here. He said many of the reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful. Freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonarmen may have accounted for many reports.
Okay, well, I'll tell Mr. McNamara this.
That's the best I can give you, Dave. Sorry. It does appear now that a lot of these torpedo attacks were from the sonar man, you see. And they get keyed up to a thing like this. Everything they hear on the sonar is a torpedo.
You're pretty sure there was a torpedo attack then?
Oh, no doubt about that, I think. No doubt about that.
No, it was just confusion. And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong. It didn't happen.
I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell.
This speech did not get very much attention. When a new president is coming to power, as John Kennedy was, the spotlight was not on Dwight Eisenhower.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions.
There was a feeling at the time that this must have been written by some speechwriter who just sneaked into the speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
3 months ago, we got contacted by a family up in Minnesota
saying that we have documents from Malcolm Moose. He was responsible in part for drafting the military-industrial complex speech.
These new papers give us written evidence that this was not just some caprice of Eisenhower's or something by some speechwriter.
You see the evolution of his speech from May 1959 to 1961.
And he wanted to give this speech for a long time, 2 years.
Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea.
There was one person in Dwight Eisenhower's life whom he really confided almost everything to, and that was his brother Milton.
There's one particular document where the speechwriters had already drafted their version of the speech, only to see Milton come along and totally revamp what had already been written.
When Milton Eisenhower was taking notes and writing things on the drafts of these speeches, the speechwriters knew that it wasn't Milton talking, it was Ike.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
He would see magazines with advertisements for some new warplane or some bomb, and he got so angry he'd take the magazine and throw it into the fireplace of the Oval Office because he felt that defense spending should not be something that would be encouraged by companies who are seeking commercial gain.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
There is an interesting document. It shows that the farewell speech would be made to Congress. But yet, President Eisenhower decided, no, he was going to address the people.
Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
One test of how well a president speaks is how long the speech lives. Here we are 50 years later, we're still talking about this speech.
Now, on Friday noon, I am to become a private citizen. I am proud to do so. I look forward to it. Thank you, and good night.
You can roughly locate any community somewhere along a scale running all the way from democracy to despotism. This man makes it his job to study these things.
Well, for one thing, avoid the comfortable idea that the mere form of government can of itself safeguard a nation against despotism.
For big business, despotism was often a useful tool for securing foreign markets and pursuing profits. One of the U.S. Marine Corps' most highly decorated generals, Smedley Darlington Butler, by his own account, helped pacify Mexico for American oil companies, Haiti and Cuba for National City Bank, Nicaragua for the Brown Brothers Brokerage, the Dominican Republic for sugar interests, Honduras for U.S. fruit companies, and China for Standard Oil. General Butler's services were also in demand in the United States itself in the 1930s, as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sought to relieve the misery of the Depression through public enterprise and tougher regulations on corporate exploitation and misdeeds.
More power to you, President Roosevelt. The entire country's behind you, thrilled with hope and patriotism.
But the country was not entirely behind the populist president. Large parts of the corporate elite despised what Roosevelt's New Deal stood for. And so, in 1934, a group of conspirators sought to involve General Butler in a treasonous plan.
The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff or as a club at least, to intimidate the government.
But the corporate cabal had picked the wrong man. Butler was fed up with being what he called a gangster for capitalism.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
congressional committee ultimately found evidence of a plot to overthrow Roosevelt. According to Butler, the conspiracy included representatives of some of America's top corporations, including J.P. Morgan, DuPont, and Goodyear Tire. As today's chairman of Goodyear Tire knows, for corporations to dominate government, a coup is no longer necessary.
Corporations have gone global. And by going global, the governments have lost some control over corporations. Regardless of whether the corporation can be trusted or cannot be trusted, governments today do not have over the corporations the power that they had and the leverage that they had 50 or 60 years ago. And that's a major change. So governments have become powerless compared to where they were before.
Capitalism today commands the towering heights and has displaced politics and politicians as the new high priests and reigning oligarchs of our system. So capitalism and its principal protagonists and players, corporate CEOs, have been accorded unusual power and access. This is not to deny the significance of government and politicians, but these are the new high priests.
Remarks of the President to the American Newspaper Publishers Association, Waldorf Astoria Hotel, New York City, April 27, 1961.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate very much your generous invitation to be here tonight. You bear heavy responsibilities these days, and the article I read some time ago reminded me of how particularly heavily the burdens of present-day events bear upon your profession. You may remember that in 1851, the New York Herald Tribune, under the sponsorship and publishing of Horace Greeley, employed as its London correspondent an obscure journalist by the name of Karl Marx. We are told that foreign correspondent Marx, stone broke, and with a family ill and undernourished, constantly appealed to Greeley and managing editor Charles Dana for an increase in his munificent salary of $5 per installment, a salary which he and Ingalls ungratefully labeled as the lousiest petty bourgeois cheating. But when all his financial appeals were refused, Marx looked around for other means of livelihood and fame, eventually terminating his relationship with the Tribune and devoting his talents full-time to the cause that would bequeath to the world the seeds of Leninism, Stalinism, revolution, and the Cold War. If only this capitalistic New York newspaper had treated him more kindly, if only Marx had remained a foreign correspondent, history might have been different. And I hope all publishers will bear this lesson in mind the next time they receive a poverty-stricken appeal from a small increase in the expense account from an obscure newspaper man. I have selected as the title of my remarks tonight, "The President and the Press." Some may suggest that this would be more naturally worded, "The President versus the Press," but those are not my sentiments tonight. It is true, however, that when a well-known diplomat from another country demanded recently that our State Department repudiate certain newspaper attacks on his colleagues, it was unnecessary for us to reply that this administration was not responsible for the press, for the press had already made it clear that it was not responsible for this administration. Nevertheless, my purpose here tonight is not to deliver the usual assault on the so-called one-party press. On the contrary, in recent months, I have rarely heard any complaints about political bias in the press, except from a few Republicans. Nor is it my purpose tonight to discuss or defend the televising of presidential press conferences. I think it is highly beneficial to have some 20 million Americans regularly sit in on these conferences to observe, if I may say so, the incisive, the intelligent, and the courteous qualities displayed by your Washington correspondents. Nor, finally, are these remarks intended to examine the proper degree of privacy which the press should allow to any president and his family. If, in the last few months, your White House reporters and photographers have been attending church services with regularity, that has surely done them no harm. On the other hand, I realize that your staff and wire service photographers may be complaining that they do not enjoy the same green privileges, the local golf courses, which they once did. It is true that my predecessor did not object, as I do, to pictures of one's golfing skill in action, but neither, on the other hand, did he ever be a Secret Service man. My topic tonight is a more sober one, of concern to publishers as well as editors. I want to talk about our common responsibilities in the face of a common danger. The events of recent weeks may have helped to illuminate that challenge for some, but the dimensions of its threat have loomed large on the horizon for many years. Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the president. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. But I do ask every publisher, every editor, and every newsman in the nation to re-examine his own standards and to recognize the nature of our country's peril. In time of war, the government and the press have customarily joined in an effort based largely on self-discipline to prevent unauthorized disclosures to the enemy. In times of clear and present danger, the courts have held that even the privileged rights of the First Amendment must yield to the public's need for national security. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with a wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope or wish to match. Nevertheless, every democracy recognizes the necessary restraints of national security. And the question remains whether those restraints need to be more strictly observed if we are to oppose this kind of attack as well as outright invasion. For the facts of the matter are that this nation's foes have openly boasted of acquiring through our newspapers information they would otherwise hire agents to acquire through theft, bribery, or espionage. That details of this nation's covert preparations to counter the enemy's covert operations have been available to every newspaper reader, friend and foe alike. That the size, the strength, the location, and the nature of our forces and weapons, and our plans and strategy for their use, have all been pinpointed in the press and other news media to a degree sufficient to satisfy any foreign power, and that in at least one case, the publication of details concerning a secret mechanism whereby satellites were followed required its alteration at the expense of considerable time and money. The newspapers which printed these stories were loyal, patriotic, responsible, and well-meaning. Had we been engaged in open warfare, they undoubtedly would not have published such items. But in the absence of open warfare, they recognized only the tests of journalism and not the tests of national security. And my question tonight is whether additional tests should not now be adopted. That question is for you alone to answer. No public official should answer it for you. No governmental plan should impose its restraints against your will. But I would be failing in my duty to the nation in considering all of the responsibilities that we now bear and all of the means at hand to meet those responsibilities if I did not commend this problem to your attention and urge its thoughtful consideration. On many earlier occasions I have said, and your newspapers have constantly said, that these are times that appeal to every citizen's sense of sacrifice, and self-discipline. They call out to every citizen to weigh his rights and comforts against his obligations to the common good. I cannot now believe that those citizens who serve in the newspaper business consider themselves exempt from that appeal. I have no intention of establishing a new Office of War Information to govern the flow of news. I am not suggesting any new forms of censorship or new types of security classifications. I have no easy answer to the dilemma that I have posed and would not seek to impose it if I had one. But I am asking the members of the newspaper profession and the industry in this country to re-examine their own responsibilities, to consider the degree and the nature of the present danger, and to heed the duty of self-restraint, which that danger imposes upon us all. Every newspaper now asks itself, with respect to every story, is it news? All I suggest is that you add the question, is it in the interest of national security? And I hope that every group in America, unions and businessmen and public officials at every level, will ask the same question of their endeavors and subject their actions to this same exacting test. And should the press of America consider and recommend the voluntary assumption of specific new steps or machinery, I can assure you that we will cooperate wholeheartedly with those recommendations. Perhaps there will be no recommendations. Perhaps there is no answer to the dilemma faced by a free and open society in a cold and secret war. In times of peace, any discussion of this subject and any action that results are both painful and without precedent. But this is a time of peace and peril, which knows no precedent in history. It is the unprecedented nature of this challenge that also gives rise to your second obligation, an obligation which I share, and that is our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security, and we intend to do it. It was early in the 17th century that Francis Bacon remarked on three recent inventions already transforming the world: the compass, gunpowder, and the printing press. Now the links between the nations, first forged by the compass, have made us all citizens of the world, the hopes and threats of one becoming the hopes and threats of us all. In that one world's effort to live together, the evolution of gunpowder to its ultimate limit has warned mankind of the terrible consequences of failure. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Last winter, the FBI was praised for its speed in cracking the case of the World Trade Center bombing and bringing 4 suspects to trial. Now, there is some evidence that the FBI may have known of the plot in advance through an informant and might even have stopped the bombing that killed 6 people. Correspondent Jacqueline Adams has the story.
FBI agents might have been able to prevent last February's deadly explosion at New York's World Trade Center. They discussed secretly substituting harmless powder for the explosives, but they didn't, according to the FBI's own informant, Imad Salem. Unbeknownst to the FBI at the time, Salem recorded many of his conversations with his handlers.
I'm holding 903 pages of draft transcripts.
William Kunstler represents Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman and several others charged with conspiring to blow up a series of New York City landmarks 4 months after the World Trade Center bombing. That case has not yet gone to trial. Kunstler confirmed newspaper reports of the Salem transcripts. In one, Salem complains to an FBI agent, "Since the bomb went off, I feel terrible. I feel bad. I feel here is people who don't listen." The agent replies, "Hey, I mean, it wasn't like you didn't try and I didn't try. You can't force people to do the right thing."
There is material in here to show gross governmental misconduct.
Today, attorneys for the defendants in the ongoing World Trade Center bombing case formally asked for the transcripts of Salem's tapes.
Quite frankly, beyond me, why now, the 4th week into the trial, we still don't have these materials.
Prosecutors have refused to comment publicly, but legal experts say the defense may have no right to those transcripts.
It's not a defense to a crime to say, if only the government had stopped me, I wouldn't have done it. So this isn't material that ordinarily the defense would be entitled to.
In court today, a witness from the Ford Motor Company linked debris recovered from the explosion site to a Ford van where defendant Mohammed Salamat was arrested less than a week after the bombing. Jacqueline Adams, CBS News, New York.
Imad Salem is a former Egyptian army officer and the government's star witness against Egyptian cleric Dr. Omar Abd Rahman, who the FBI says was the ringleader in the bombing plot. Salem was paid an estimated $1.5 million to infiltrate and inform on Rahman and his followers. He was recruited shortly after the 1991 assassination of right-wing Rabbi Meir Kahane. As an associate of Rahman, Salem traveled in the cleric's inner circle, where he surreptitiously recorded conversations with Rahman. But unknown to his FBI handlers at the time, Salem also recorded his dealings with the government. A newspaper article revealed the existence of the tapes, and the Reuters news agency received written transcripts. A copy of one of the most revealing conversations between Imad Salem and an FBI agent named John was recently acquired by WBAI. In that conversation, Salem demands more money from the FBI, outlining his contributions to the agency, including a cryptic statement by Salem to the FBI. Salem says, "We know the bombs start to be built by your confidential informant." According to a source close to the case, Imad Salem checked into a Manhattan hospital 3 hours after the blast, complaining of a severe ringing in his ears. A hospital spokesperson refuses to confirm or deny the report. Salem also mentions a defendant convicted in the World Trade Center bombing, Mohammed Abulima, a man Salem says he located in Egypt for the FBI. The first voice is Imad Salem, the second FBI agent John.
Abu Halima will be killed and hidden and gone forever, and you will never know about him that he ever went to Egypt. will be off the record. And then you have the greatest suspect is gone and lost forever. And you will keep looking for him for the rest of your life. See how much that will cost you. But because you get aware that he's there and you requested him, Egypt stopped it immediately.
No, even the last 3 weeks is going to be a nice payment. I'm just telling you for the future and what the expenses, they just don't want to buy in on $500 of expenses. That's all. We're just going to have to give me the, some of the expenses, and they'll pay what operationally they are allowed to pay.
Let me think about it.
Don't think it. There's nothing to think about.
Of course I have to think about it. I mean, I have...
And then later on, there's bonuses and things of that nature. The only thing I'm telling you different than from before is that it's not a salary.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I'm telling you that is different than what we were doing anyway.
Yeah.
Okay? And
okay, let him to go recruit Ahmad Abdu, or let him to go talk to Ahmad Abdel Sattar. Ahmad Sattar, he's a good subject. He can really give you a big help.
Yeah.
Let him really to give you a big help.
Look, he doesn't understand everything.
Well, he have to understand. He is the boss. We all running our heads around this boss. So he gotta understand this point.
But basically nothing has changed. I'm just telling you for my own sake that this isn't a salary, that it's, but you got paid regularly for good information. I mean, the expenses were a little bit out of the ordinary, and it was really questioned. Don't tell Nancy I told you this.
Well, I have to tell her, of course.
Well, then if you have to, you have to.
Yeah, because, I mean, the lady was being honest, and I was being honest, and everything was submitted with a receipt.
Yeah.
And now it's questionable.
It's not questionable. It's like a little out of ordinary.
Okay.
All
right. I don't think it was. If that's what you think, guys, fine. But I don't think that, because we was start already building the bomb, which is went off in the World Trade Center. It was built by supervision from the Bureau and the DA, and we was all informed about it, and we know that the bomb start to be built. By who? By your confidential informant. What a wonderful, great case.
Well.
And then he put his head in the sand and said, oh, no, that's not true. He is son of a bitch. Okay, it's built with a different way in another place, and that's it.
Well, don't make any rash decisions. I'm just trying to be as honest with you as I can.
Of course, I appreciate that.
And as far as the the payments go and everything like that, they're there. I guarantee you that they are there. I'm just saying they are there. They have to be documented.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. They don't pay a salary. All right, just think about it that way. I have to document every time I put in what we call a blue slip to request funds for your services. Attached to the blue slip has to be documentation as to what you've done. Period. That's it.
Yeah.
And the circles that you're running around in, that stuff is never going to go dry. However, I would like to see you just continue going on making a living as you are. Because in the future, you're going to have to, or maybe want to slow down. I mean, Sattar does it. I don't know, the whole cast of NASA, all those people, they all work, the engineers working here, working there. It would be better for you.
Yeah.
Okay, I know you're doing a great job building your credibility, but in a month or so, you have to tell them, hey guys, I got bills to pay. I'm going to be available in the evenings or the weekends. Now you still get the same kind of money, but you're still making your other money working there.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Am I making sense at all?
No.
No.
No, I'm being honest too. I'm being honest too.
I know you want to be very aggressive. You want to go in there, full force.
I am going full force. I am working from the bottom of my heart. Nobody requested me to work till midnight. I leave at 9 o'clock in the morning. I come back midnight, go to sleep, and get up next morning and get exposed to people who's trying to, like an hour today with this reporter trying to just grab something out of my teeth, and I got a thing that will be anti the Bureau. It got to be with a certain level. It shouldn't be very high. It shouldn't be, and I got to cover up my back with the people. They got to be happy about what I'm saying. I have 2 reporters coming in their way now. I got to speak to them, anti the Bureau, and be extremely damn careful. So one day when I get questions about that, I should be, leveled. So it's a hard game to make Ahmed Absattar happy, and to make Dr. Rahman happy, and to make the reporters happy.
I feel just like you do right now, trying to make everybody
I know,
happy.
and to make Mr. John happy. What's his last name?
Who?
John what?
Krauthamel.
Grand?
Krauthamel, German last name. Krauthamel.
Krauthamel.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
But
Yeah.
look, besides all this bureaucratic bullshit,
Yeah.
we're going to still do a good job.
Yeah.
Okay? And, don't worry.
All
okay?
right. Okay.
You've gone too far. Too good.
That's what happened the first time. The first time I went so far, so quickly. I took the man to Detroit. I started taking care of things. And we were surprised. And you get wonder, how come this guy going that far that quickly? And that makes him, that's not good. Okay. This guy is a professional guy. This guy is doing things he learned to do it. So let him to work.
Yeah.
Let him to work. And like I'm telling you, John, one thing you can always say is Ahmad Salim falsified any information to the Bureau. Be honest with me, say yes or no.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Did I ever you ever verified information and you find me falsified any information to the Bureau?
Falsified? No.
Right?
No.
No. All right. So every single information I supplied it's very excellent and correct. I was talking to Sayyid Nusayir's wife yesterday, and she's going to visit him today, and I will be going to visit him next week, as per the arrangement. What am I supposed to do this trip? I don't have money to do this trip from the very beginning, and then to go over there, and the guy will ask me to build a bomb again, or to kidnap a judge again, or to get in touch of so and so to help me do so and so. Who will do that? Who else will do that?
Nobody. Nobody could do that.
Okay. We wasting time. We're wasting time.
Let me tell you something.
Yes.
We're talking about this money over here. Well, when you come up with big things like we got a few of them already. The fact that we got a head start on Abu Halim's brother, and the fact that I don't even know.
1 second. One of the reporters arrived. I guess.
All right. Look.
1 second.
All right.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes.
No, it's me.
Okay. I'll be right down. Thank you. Okay, bye.
Is that one of them?
No, that's delivery.
Oh. But the only thing that's changed is I told you how the payment system works.
Okay.
That's all.
Mm-hmm.
And just keep going. And like I'm saying, when you have good information, that's a real bonus that leads to other information.
Who will evaluate this is a good information, real bonus or not? Who will evaluate that?
Who evaluates that?
Yeah. Who will say that this is a valuable information, and who will say, okay, we have this phone number already, so what's the big deal? We know that he has a fax, so nothing big deal. So what? The man has a fax. But when you know that this guy has a communication all over the world over this fax, and the Bureau doesn't know about it, I think it's a very valuable information.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Okay.
But like I said, there's a lot of good information in a short 3 weeks that has come. You've come right back to where you were 6 months ago, 7 months ago.
I guess more.
More and more.
And now he's coming again to mess it up. And once I'm stubborn too, because I get tired of that. If I withdraw myself again, forget it, to gain or to earn this kind of trust from these people anymore. It's going to be.
Don't withdraw.
I hear you. I mean, how could I? I was planning to grab my car and jump to Brooklyn tonight. I'm not going. Because, of course, I didn't go to the court today. Muhammad Ibn al-Gabroni and Ali al-Gabroni and Muhammad Abu Halima, 3 of them was waiting for me over there.
But do these people work at all?
No, they are not.
But you have to explain them, too, that you can't go to every single thing. I mean, I know you get...
If I didn't go to every single thing, I'm not going to bring information. Plain and simple. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, you're right, but,
So even they don't want me around, I gotta try to find an excuse to put myself there. In this meeting, when they having dinner, I gotta go squish my nose between them trying to make myself like hungry. And I'm not. To listen what's going on. That's why when I heard Muhammad Abu Halima say that he went with his brother and Muhammad Salama, and there is some kind of whispering in their ears from Sayyid Nasser. How valuable this information to you?
It's good. It's good. It's good
It is good, and it's very important, and will let us to go back on the paperwork and see these people went together, and then give that to the district attorney, who can say these people went so and so and so. And we have reports that they was talking to this guy, 3 of them. What is the link between 3 of them? And things. It's a lot of things to
Everything's the same. I'm just telling you. The only thing I told you was regarding the payments. I mean, what difference does it make what I told you half an hour ago or what you were expecting 2 hours ago? That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just telling you what has been relayed to me.
Okay, Rajan, I really feel sorry for you. I mean, I swear to God, because I really like you very much, and I have a great respect for you. I feel so sorry for you for what you're trying to do.
I feel sorry for me too.
I know. I mean, and really.
I mean,
I know that. Therefore, go back to work, and don't be mad at me.
I'm not mad. Believe me, I'm very frustrated and very. I can't. I mean,
I will just try to cool myself down until this guy is coming within in any minutes now.
Yeah.
I gotta be ready to speak to him.
Yeah, but just look. There's gonna be a payment coming. Look, like for example, here's the first paragraph, right?
Yes.
So-and-so went to New York District Court with Mohammed al-Gabroni and then returned to Abu Bakr Mosque in Brooklyn, where he met with Ahmed Sattar and Mohammed Hassan. Telephone number so-and-so. Hassan is identical to Mohammed Hassan Abdu, which is well known to the New York office and the close associates of Saeed Nasser and Rockman. At the Mosque, Sattar, Gabroni, Mohammed Hassan, and so-and-so went to the basement. They talk, I'm going to talk about what they talked about, and it's about Abu Halima, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And I'm going to ask, for good money. One of these things in a month payment should justify that kind, the kind of money you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you that that's the way it has to be for the payments. That's all.
Yeah.
Instead of saying don't worry about it and still do it anyway. That's all I was told, to tell you.
Okay.
That's all. It's all the same. I just can't guarantee you everything on the expenses side. That they're going to be a little picky on it. That's all.
Okay.
So, I mean, so you want the you need $500 a week right now to do what you're doing, and we'll pick up, your operational expenses. That's it. They're going to be, I'm telling you right now, they're going to be a little stingy on things that they feel a normal person would be spending out of his own pocket anyway.
Yeah.
That's their feeling, and that's all.
Okay.
So, I don't know how else to say. I want you to keep doing what you're doing. Not only forget about one supervisor or one ASAC or whatever. We're doing this for a higher reason. We know what we're doing, and we know what it's going to mean in the future. Forget about bureaucrats. Forget about them. They come and go. Okay?
Okay.
We know what we're doing, and at the end, we're going to at least be able to look at each other and said, we tried the best we could. Not for the government. The government is a very, what do you call it? Unidentifiable thing. Sometimes it's one person affecting you, sometimes it's bureaucratic things. But we'll still know what we did. Yeah. And I'm not gonna leave you out in the cold regarding funding and payments, and if that's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
I'll talk to you in the morning?
Yeah.
Okay.
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 Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Can the federal government take credit for saving us from a plot of its own creation? Tonight, has the federal government kept us safe, or does it just want us to think that it has kept us safe? Since the tragedy of 9/11, numerous crazies and low-level copycats have engaged in criminal behavior which they hoped would result in the deaths of innocent Americans and somehow advance their cause of jihad. If you ask the leadership of the FBI, most of whose field agents are tireless, dedicated, Constitution-supporting professionals, it will tell you that the FBI, has foiled about 17 plots to kill Americans during the past 10 years. What it will not tell you is that there have been 20 foiled plots, and of them, 3 were interrupted by members of the public. The 17 that were interrupted by the feds were created by the feds. We all remember the 3 that were foiled by diligent Americans: the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, and the Times Square bomber. In all of these cases, the crimes charged were those of attempting to kill and conspiring with others to do so. In all three of those cases, alert Americans on transcontinental flights or in the streets of New York City told authorities of bizarre behavior or actually subdued the threats themselves. There was no foiling by the FBI. The plotters were, thankfully, bumbling fools who had poorly planned their criminal behavior and who ended up harming no one. All three are serving life terms. But the more curious cases are the remaining 17 for which the federal government has taken credit. They all have a common and reprehensible thread. They were planned, plotted, controlled, and carried out by the federal government itself. In all of these 17 cases, from the Fort Dix 6 to the Lackawanna 7 to the Portland parade bomber, the feds found young men of Muslim backgrounds, loners who were bitter at America. They befriended them, cajoled them, and persuaded them that they could change the world by killing Americans. In all these cases, agents worked undercover and portrayed themselves to the targets as Arabs of like un-American mind. In some cases, the federal agents used third parties to act as middlemen. The third parties were typically persons who had been convicted of crimes and who, in return for leniency at their own sentencings, were willing to work with the same feds who prosecuted them in order to help the feds entrap whomever else those feds were pursuing. Thus, in all 17 of these cases, because of the command and control of federal agents, no one was ever in danger, no one was harmed, no bomb went off, and no property was damaged. But in all those cases, the losers whom the feds targeted each believed that they were interacting with real plotters who would bring them cash and bombs. As we know, sometimes the cash arrived, but the bombs never did. The defendants were essentially charged and convicted for playing a game with federal agents. The most recent of those government-generated plots was revealed yesterday. It has a new twist because it allegedly involves agents of the intelligence apparatus of the government of Iran. It, too, was destined to go nowhere, as the feds monitored and taped every move made by their target as he interacted with federal agents whom he stupidly believed to be drug dealers and co-conspirators. Today, the feds themselves revealed that high officials of Iran's government knew nothing of this. Of course, the neocons have demanded bombs on Tehran, no matter what the government there knew. And this plot came to light the day before Attorney General Holder himself was subpoenaed by Congress in the Fast and Furious case. You get the picture. Are any of these plots criminal? Can the government just pick and choose whom to seduce and then lower the boom at the right time and arrest its would-be Confederates? Is this a proper and efficient use of law enforcement resources? The answers to these questions are obvious, and they are not good. The courts have made this legal, so long as the target of these plots had a mental predisposition to cause harm. But none of this keeps us safe. All of this makes us less free, as any one of us can be entrapped. And we are fools if we praise the government for exposing a plot of its own creation and saving us from a danger that never existed. Can the government break the law in order to enforce it? Well, when it does, it becomes a law unto itself, and the rule of law dies as the feds decide whom to target and whom to trap. Think about it. Are we really safe in a false sense of security? Why do we pay the government to trick us into believing it is keeping us safe? When no one is harmed and the government controls the plot, aren't we just punishing someone for his thoughts? And in a free society, aren't free people free to think as they wish? This must be so. Because if the government can punish our thoughts, there are no limits to its power. From New York, defending freedom.
Now, one side in this campaign has been telling us that the issues of this election are the maintenance of peace and prosperity. The line has been used, we've never had it so good.
I won't have to worry about putting gas in my car. I won't have to worry about paying my mortgage. You know, if I help him, he's going to help me.
But I have an uncomfortable feeling that this prosperity isn't something on which we can base our hopes for the future.
The key point I'm making right now is that the economy is moving in a positive direction.
And yet our government continues to spend $17 million a day more than the government takes in.
You're telling me we got to go spend money to keep from going bankrupt? The answer is yes, I'm telling you.
We've raised our debt limit 3 times in the last 12 months. And now our national debt is 1.5 times bigger than all the combined debts of all the nations of the world.
We're going to raise the debt limit. We always have. We will do it again.
We have $15 billion in gold in our treasury. We don't own an ounce.
I have been informed that the majority plans to block consideration of this amendment, which is number 1367, regarding the transparency at the Federal Reserve.
Foreign dollar claims are $27.3 billion.
It said that China has now surpassed Japan as the U.S. government's largest creditor, owning at least 10% of all U.S. debt, perhaps as much as $700 billion.
And we've just had announced that the dollar of 1939 will now purchase 45 cents in its total value.
President Obama is expected to face tough questions over the U.S. decision to pump $600 billion freshly printed dollars into its economy. Now, the move is an attempt to revive the country's finances, but will result in the devaluation of the dollar.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours,
you'll construct a legal regime to make indefinite detention legal.
history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
For some trips, it'll be faster than flying, without the pat-down.
Anna was picked to go through. Pretty much everybody except the baby was picked to go through the scanner.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
Damn America, that's in the Bible.
Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
I've got a core set of values that I think have to be advanced, and that my individual salvation depends on our collective salvation.
You and I are told increasingly we have to choose between a left or right. Well, I'd like to suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There's only an up or down.
We had an election, and it was about a direction for our country.
And regardless of their sincerity, their humanitarian motives, those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. In this vote harvesting time, they use terms like the Great Society, or as we were told a few days ago by the President, we must accept a greater government activity in the affairs of the people.
E pluribus unum, out of many, one. In the end, that's what this election is about.
Well, the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Over the course of 10 years, it would cost what it would cost us. All right, okay, we're going to. It would cost us about the same as it would cost